Today's big league ball player I'll be talking about touches on many of my current themes, which has been shows on coaches and managers, spectacular home runs, brothers, and my ever-present salute to those who served. And because it's April, my latest theme has been players' MLB opening day games. This guy just didn't play for the 1955 Seattle Rainiers championship team, which has been my main theme so far this year. So let's go. When asked by a reporter, how did he do it? In his humble way, he said, I just kept running. That's the man of the moment talking about his last at-bat in the second game of a doubleheader between his Pittsburgh Pirates and the St. Louis Cardinals, May 1st, 1955, at Pittsburgh's Forbes Field. In the first game of this doubleheader, George was 0 for 4 at the plate, striking out twice with a couple of fly balls. The Pirates rallied but lost. The second game of the doubleheader didn't start out any better for the 28-year-old. In his first at-bat, he struck out. His second, a pop fly. And in his third at-bat, George does what some do when struggling, lays down a bunt and ends up grounding out. It was a long day at the plate for the Bucs' third baseman. His little brother, Gene, who is 7 years younger and plays second base for the Pirates, he also struggled at the plate on this day. In this second game, the Pirates are up 3-0 over the Cardinals going into the bottom of the eighth. Pirates' Dick Groat leads off with a single. Felipe Montemayor gets a walk. Frank Thomas lays down a bunt, advancing the runners, but is thrown out. Dale Long is intentionally walked so that Cardinals pitcher Herb Moford can get to George, who everybody at Forbes Field knows is having a bad day at the plate. So with the bases loaded, George Walter Freese steps up to the plate. George Freese comes from a family that was very close-knit, consisting of a mom and a dad who had 3 boys and a girl. George was the oldest, his nickname Bud, and he is from Wheeling, West Virginia, where living alongside the Ohio River has its disadvantages. The river would crest, flooding the area and their home. This happened 2 years in a row. The first time in 1936, 16 people from Wheeling died. 20,000 were forced out of their home. These events only made the family even closer when, out of necessity, the entire Freese family moved up to the second floor, living there until the river would recede. Born in 1926, and like most American boys, George played sandlot baseball, and when he got to high school, like most I talk about, he lettered in football and baseball. But he was one of those teenagers who didn't play basketball, instead joined the track team. That's what I did. More fun running around outdoors at practice with pretty girls in shorts, as opposed to stuck indoors with sweaty guys in shorts playing basketball. Weighing 190 pounds and standing 6 foot even, in George's neck of the woods, everything revolved around playing football. In 1944, he was the starting quarterback as a freshman at the University of Pittsburgh. But the fun times were short-lived, and his college life was put on hold when he was called up to serve his country, with the next 2 years spent in the Army Air Corps. Once he got out of Uncle Sam's uniform and took off those big, heavy boots, he was quick to put on football uniform and a pair of cleats when George received a scholarship to West Virginia U and was the Mountaineers' star quarterback for 1946, and in 1947 made honorable mention at quarterback All-American. When he was a senior and his football season was over, George was now free to play on the Mountaineer baseball team. As soon as he graduated college, the Pittsburgh Steelers came a-knocking with an offer to play football for them. But George thought twice about that, saying when his knees were hurt from playing football, he remembered having knee surgery and the long recovery time from that operation and didn't want to go through that again. You know, old-time surgeons fillet you in order to fix the problem back then, leading to a very long and sometimes painful recovery. Now college educated and holding a degree, the young man made the smart move, choosing to play baseball and signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1948 as a free agent. So at the age of 21, George Freese switched sports and started his pro baseball career with the Johnstown Johnnies, Mid-Atlantic League Class C. In 1951, George led the Western League in batting average when he was on the Pueblo Dodgers with Roy Face. 1952 season was spent with the Mobile Bears, the Dodgers AA affiliate, playing with Spook Jacobs, who has his place in the MLB record book. George was then taken from the Dodgers by Sport Shirt Bill Veeck and his St. Louis Browns in the Rule 5 draft and was invited to the Browns' 1953 spring training camp. I recently watched a clip of George Freese talking about his short stint with the Browns, and his face lit up when talking about Satchel Paige. There's Satchel right there. But before the start of the season, the Browns sold him to the Detroit Tigers. So after 5 years in pro ball, playing on 8 teams in 8 leagues, he finally makes his MLB debut, April of 1953 with Detroit. That was his one and only game as a Tiger. A month later, they sold him to the Chicago Cubs, with the monthly moves continuing in June, when George Freese was part of a blockbuster deal when the Cubs traded George, Press Ward, and some others, plus $150,000 to the Pittsburgh Pirates in exchange for Ralph Kiner, Joe Garagiola, and some others. It's with the Pirates in 1955 that George finally gets some big league playing time. The Cubs would take him back from the Pirates in 1955 minor league draft, and it would be 5 long years before returning to the majors for George. With the 1956 pennant-winning LA Angels, George was one of 6 players on that championship team to hit 20 or more home runs, with the PCL MVP and Triple Crown winner Steve Bilko hitting 55 all by himself. George wound up in Portland for 1957, becoming the Beavers' star third baseman, playing with Casey Wise, Bob Thorpe, Ed Mickelson, Dave Hillman, and Johnny Briggs. George was named All-Pacific Coast League in 1958 and 1959, leading the Beavers in batting average both years, hitting 35 homers in 1958, a team high. Partway through the 1960 season, he was traded to the San Diego Padres in the Pacific Coast League, with his final 4 seasons continuing his trips around the country, with his final MLB appearance in 1961, 9 games with the Cubs. George Freese appeared in well over 1,600 minor league games and knocked out 170 home runs. During his time in the majors, that consisted of 61 games with 3 teams in 3 different seasons, and had 3 big league home runs. He would stay with the Cubs organization until 1970 as a coach, then managing their minor league teams, all the while a scout. In 1971, he switched to the California League, managing for the San Diego Padres, and his last 2 seasons, he was hired to manage the Bakersfield Dodgers. Over 17 seasons, he played on 20 teams in 14 leagues, retiring as a player in 1964 at the age of 37. Lucky for George Freese, during his short time in the Big Show, he got to play on both leagues and played in all the MLB parks. So after being involved with the game for a quarter century, George decided to leave the baseball world behind and get a job that would keep him in Portland. His new career, a supermarket grocer. George would now be filling bags instead of running them. He has fond memories of playing in the Pacific Coast League with the Angels and especially with his Portland Beavers. And only if asked, George would tell you stories about his time playing in Portland and hitting home runs at Multnomah Stadium over the left field wall and out into the street. I watched a nice clip of George Freese at his 2008 induction into the Oregon Sports Hall of Fame. He's up on a small stage sitting next to the host of the event, and he's in a room surrounded by friends and family, and it's obvious by the smiles and tears who his loved ones are. George is very well dressed and looks sharp, but kind of frail. The voice, it's soft, and when it's time for the actual induction, George got out of his chair on his own, but it took a second, like it would any former athlete at the age of 82. He's real stiff, like a guy who has a body full of aches and pains, those of a pro baseball player who played for 17 years. Add to that all those years on the gridiron, playing high school football and college football. At his induction ceremony, George told this story that involved his little brother Gene, and he told it with a smile. It was an exhibition game between younger brother Gene and his visiting St. Louis Cardinals and George's Portland Beavers, MLB versus the PCL. Little brother Gene is playing shortstop when big brother George steps up to the plate. Little brother Gene decides to have some fun with his big brother. Since it's only an exhibition game, Gene calls timeout and motions with his arms for all the outfielders to come in real close. They did. Gene said, "No, closer." George said he was a little mad at Gene for the stunt and proceeded to smack the ball clear out of Multnomah Stadium. It was funny to watch George Freese tell the story because now the old guy starts to come to life and gets a little animated as he tells this part of the story. He says, "So I'm coming around second base and Gene acted like he fainted and fell down on his back. I don't know why I didn't stop and kick him in the butt." Awkward transition, but we'll go with it. Back in the 1950s, while playing winter ball in Puerto Rico, George Freese married his college sweetheart, Betty. They would make their home in Portland, Oregon for 56 years, and together they would raise a loving family just like the ones George was brought up in. Betty passed away in 2012. George followed her 2 years later. Blood is thicker than water. Here's another story about the Freese brothers that I told before when I did Gene's show, but it's only fair that I tell it again. You know, brothers. It was a minor league ball game when Gene Freese is at bat, the man of the moment. Big brother George is in the outfield playing for the other team. George's pitcher, Tommy Lasorda, is on the mound, and for some reason, Tommy throws at Gene, whizzing one right past his head. Was it on purpose? Maybe some prior beef between the two? Whatever the reason, it didn't matter to George, because when he saw that pitch just miss his little brother's head, he was so mad at Tommy Lasorda he charged the mound from the outfield and went after his own pitcher in defense of his little brother. In his later years after retiring from the supermarket business, George was no different than most, enjoying time with the family, watching sports, hunting, and showing up to all the annual gatherings. Besides being a real nice person, what I liked most about George Freese was how much he loved Christmas time. Many don't when they get older. His family say he embraced it, giving out joy and taking joy in, doing all the things to make Christmas fun and memorable family event. He was the highlight of every Christmas. A nice way to bring us to the conclusion of today's episode. And by now, you know my style. So here I go with my usual. Now back to the start of today's show and George Freese's last at-bat of a doubleheader between his Pirates and the Cardinals on a day that wasn't going well for both Freese brothers at the plate. So here we are in the bottom of the eighth with the bases loaded. George steps up to what has been an unfriendly batter's box for the eighth time today. His previous 7 at-bats were all frustrating. But sometimes all it takes is a swing of a bat and it can change your whole day, making those beers after the game taste a whole lot better. Just like it did for George Freese on that May 1st back in 1955 when he swung the bat and connected, hitting a long line drive to deep center field, and he took off running. Rounded first base and kept on running. Rounded second and kept on running. As the other base runners one by one crossed home plate, George Freese was rounding third and heading for home and would cross home plate for an inside the park grand slam that blew the game open and sealed a victory for the Pirates. When the reporter asked, "How did he do it?" in his humble way, George said, "I just kept running." Don't know if you picked up on it, but today was a brothers theme. Brothers.